Hello, I'm Jim Morris, and this is Shaman TV. Our guest today is Raven Smith, who is a modern shaman, and we'll see what the modern part is pretty soon. We might even maybe coin a phrase and call him a techno-shaman, since he helped set this whole shoot up. And also a little bit of a disclaimer, Raven is my teacher and has been for a number of years, and when I first met you in Peru, no, I first met you at Lee McCormick's, but when we met again in Peru, and I watched you work for a while, I said, okay, this is my guy. This is the guy I want to learn this stuff from. I felt like we were kind of on the same wavelength, and you had been learning the stuff I wanted to know. Something that's kind of interesting about this is that one of the principles of Toltec shamanism, which Raven is principally a Toltec shaman, although we had a ceremony yesterday that seemed to incorporate parts of Toltec, Inca, North American, Indian, pretty much the whole spectrum of shamanism. So obviously you're not, you're not restricted to one discipline. But what set you on this path?
Well, what set me on this path really is having a deep sense of the world not being right, about that what I had been shown about the world, what I'd been presented as the world by society and by the world, by everyone in my dream, okay, that there were pieces missing, that I just felt like this couldn't be it. This couldn't be all that there was. And so I started seeking, as many of us do, a sense of spirituality, a sense of what is this all about?
Looking for answers. Where was the first place you found an answer?
First place I found an answer was a teacher that I had up in Oregon, who really was very clear and very eclectic, had been in lots of different spiritual traditions, and he really helped me to start the process of unweaving my belief system.
So, this different spiritual traditions and incorporation of different spiritual traditions is kind of interesting to me. I have a hypothetical audience. I have no idea if my audience is like my hypothetical audience or not, but I see them as being, some of them earnest seekers, some of them skeptics, some of them, so I always kind of want to throw in a little something for the skeptics. And one of the criticisms I've seen and had experienced of people saying, well, you just, you try one thing and then you try another, and you can't stick to one thing, and I don't buy that. I think they complement each other and augment each other. And how about you? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to this coin, and one of them is something that I think is really important to understand, and that is the idea of lineages, the idea of these traditions that have been passed down through time. And it's really important to honor those traditions and to understand why they existed in that way, so that the teachings didn't get diluted, okay? And so that people were not distracted from the path, so that there was a shared context that was moving forward through time to help people through the same problems that we all experience. Okay? Then we move into the quote, more modern age, okay, the time that we're living in now, and those lineages have all come forward and presented those teachings out into the public. And what that's created is people these days are mostly eclectic.
Right.
Very few people are in a lineage that has been passed down time over time. There still exist, but it's very eclectic. And that eclecticness is just a function of how much information is available.
Well, also, we're Americans. I mean, my ancestry is English, Irish, Dutch, Scottish, and Cherokee. And I've picked up a little something from all of those people. And I'm sure your experience is much the same.
Right.
But okay, here's a question for you, something that I've been interested in, and that is, there is a commonality to all of those traditions. They all talk about the, heaven, the earth, and hell, or the upper world and the underworld. And these people weren't talking to each other before,
right.
So what is the mechanism of, I mean, is this just hardwired, something that the human myth structure is hardwired for, or did they connect with each other in dreams, or what do you think?
Well, the important thing to understand about a shamanic path is that the purpose or the focus of the path is to go and perceive the knowledge directly. So the teachings are designed to help you open your perceptions in all the different shamanic paths into other dimensions, into other times, into other points of existence, and experience those things for yourself directly. Okay?
Right.
And what we find is that, so if you get very adept at practicing in such a path, okay, on a shamanic path, the more you develop, the deeper you go into it, you start to touch into realms and places that are common for everyone, that are part of what's possible for humans to experience. And so we get these ideas, these frameworks, these contexts that we wind up sharing about what's the underworld, what's the middle world, what's the upper world, okay? And how we deal with all of these different things winds up being very similar, because we're not perceiving exactly the same thing, because we bring our direct perceptions back and filter them through our domestication, our socialization, but we are actually seeing the same things when we go deep enough.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, for instance, you know, I've been with you and others to Teotihuacan in Mexico, which is, you know, that's Toltec, and I've been with you to Machu Picchu and places like that, and there is a tremendous overlap, but there are also significant differences, and it's, well, there are, for that matter, within the tradition, there are significant differences. And one of the things that I've thought about is that for most of the history of these traditions, they've been passed down orally. So one of the characteristics of an oral tradition is that everybody that passes it on puts their little spin on it. And in consequence, even though it's the basic idea is the same, there's little, you know, little bits of emphasis and little bits of...
Yeah. Well, what happens is that a shamanic teacher, a teacher in the shamanic world, okay, is normally working one-on-one with somebody or with a very small group of people. And all the teachings, what's really important to understand about spiritual teachings, okay, is that spiritual teachings are being taught to someone. Okay?
Right.
And that someone has a very specific set of beliefs and limitations that they have created over the course of their life.
Right.
And the teacher is addressing their stuff, okay, their beliefs. And a lot of that stuff is going to be cultural. So the differences between the shamanic traditions have to do with the different cultures that those traditions are being presented in. Because different types, there's kind of the general frame where we all have the same kind of beliefs that we create that make limitations, but then there's the specific things on a cultural and individual level. Right. And those teachers are always talking to somebody. And that's really important. That's really important to understand, because that explains a lot of the differences, and it also helps us to see that there are no generalities.
Right.
Okay? That you can't say it's this way for everybody. Okay? The teachers are not saying that. They're addressing somebody specific.
And also, I think that there are times when a teacher will just tell you a flat lie to move you in a certain direction, and then maybe correct it later, or maybe leave you to figure it out for yourself.
Well, you know, our idea of what is the truth changes over time.
Sure.
Okay? Truth is relative to your point of perception.
Right.
Okay. So things that right now the deepest truth the thing that might point you to the deepest truth. I could tell you something that on the surface may be a lie,
right,
in this context, but it's pointing towards a deeper truth. It's pointing for you to go deeper and find out what is the truth behind this.
Well, that brings us to another thing, which is, okay, the minute you say a word, you've already told a lie, because the map is not the territory, the word is not the thing.
Yeah, the description is not the reality.
Exactly. And so it seems to me you're kind of like constructing a fish trap, you know, one of these funnel fish traps, so that you just swim closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to it until finally you break through in it. But when you break through, the fish trap is the words, and there's no crap on the other side of the words.
That's right. And that's why all traditions, really, all methods should eject you at some point beyond the description of the teachings.
Right.
The teachings as words, as concept, this is really important in the shamanic viewpoint, is the concepts are not it. Okay? Our concepts of what a teaching is or what the world is about is a description of the reality. It's not the reality itself. So
Right.
at some point, hopefully, if the words are good, okay, if the words are good words, if the teachings are clear teachings, then they point us towards a direct experience.
Right.
That is the gold. That is
Right.
the pearls of the teaching. The talk around it is, all of the different methods and the talk and the concepts of the divine and the methods, okay,
Right.
is all words. It doesn't have any real meaning until you directly experience what the teaching is about.
Right. So all you're trying to do is just point the person, point the person,
Right.
point the person. Just to harken back to the point of, the teacher is teaching someone.
Mm-hmm.
And my reading on this started with Carlos Castaneda.
Mm-hmm.
Way back in the 70s, I started reading Carlos Castaneda, and I read it and read it and read it and read it and read it, and I read commentary on Carlos Castaneda, and I read debunking of Carlos Castaneda. And at some point along in there, it occurred to me, wait a minute, Don Juan wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Carlos Castaneda.
Right.
So he was talking to a specific type of strange plugged up fool. That's what he called it. and we're all strange plugged up fools, but we're plugged up in different ways. And so you kind of, even those teachings, you kind of have to think, okay, he was talking to that guy.
Right.
And I don't even know that guy. I know the character that guy made out of himself in those books, but also I'm pretty sure that he did a lot of it for effect.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just fall in line and do exactly.
Right.
A clear example is I perceive energy, you perceive energy, we all perceive energy. Carlos Castaneda has very specific descriptions of how, quote, energy is perceived, unquote. Well, it doesn't work that way for me. I see it differently than that.
Right.
Or I don't see it at all. Sometimes I just feel it.
Exactly, and if you look in those books, Don Juan actually addresses this very clearly with Castaneda. He says this whole idea of seeing energy is a misnomer because it's like we're all going to agree that the leaves outside are green. It's not like that. Whenever we drop beneath the surface and open our perceptions, we perceive it directly, and that direct perception is very different than the labels that we can place on it.
Sure.
Okay?
And we don't perceive directly. We don't perceive the same. I have no way of knowing when I see chartreuse that you don't see pea green or purple for that matter.
Right.
And but we're both looking at the same thing. But the fact that it's a thing is an agreement. If I understand modern physics correctly, and there's considerable reason to believe that I don't, but if I understand modern physics correctly, everything is a wave until it's observed, at which point it becomes a particle.
It can go either way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the actual act of observing it that changes it from a wave or particle. If you think it's like in quantum physics, if you look at something and you think it's a particle, then it becomes a particle. If you think it's a wave, it becomes a wave. And this is very much
okay.
This is very much how things work. It's our perceptions of things that define our experience of reality.
So objectivity is a myth.
Right. There is no object. I mean,
Right.
quantum physics has pointed this out to the nth degree. There is no objectivity because the act of studying something changes it. Okay?
Sure. Sure.
So the observer, the person who's running any experiment, is by definition changing the outcome of the experiment by trying to run the experiment.
Yeah. Well, in my reading, and I rely too much on that, but that's my bent. But in my reading lately, I've been sort of reading specialists. I mean, Robert Moss specializes in dreaming, and he's really good on dreaming because he's a terrific writer. And I've been, for intent, I've been reading the Abraham Hicks books. And what's fun about those is you know, I mean, that kind of wisdom you could put on a matchbook cover.
Yeah.
So, you know, she and Abraham, speaking through Esther Hicks, talks about that. You know, we just have the same message. We just keep rewording it to hold your interest. But the thing that's great about it is they're entertaining, they're funny, and they keep you focused, because the whole world conspires to convince you that the world is a certain way that it's not. But if I understand that stuff correctly, in the process of creating our own reality, the object of the game is to keep your attention on what you want. Because if you keep your attention on what you want, you get what you want. If you keep your attention on what you don't want, then you might as well be sitting around smashing your toe with a ball-peen hammer, because that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, I think that that's true to a certain extent, but the thing I think that's missing from a lot of those teachings is what you really want is not your idea of what you want.
Oh, yeah.
What you really want is a particular feeling state.
Sure.
You're looking for, what we're all looking for is to have a particular feeling state or direct experience of the world.
Right.
So the red sports, you know, to use Heather Ash's classic example, you know, the reds, you don't want a red sports car.
Right.
What you want actually is the feeling of what that represents. So it may be the wind blowing in your hair, it may be the sense of freedom of having a vehicle that you can go anywhere with. It may be because you want to be more attractive to the opposite sex. You want to have that feeling of being fuller and more abundant. But that's actually what you want, not the red sports car.
Well, let's say, okay, if you knew you could have a Rolex watch, say you're, you know, some poor kid that his whole life has dreamed that when I'm a success, the emblem of my success will be a Rolex watch. But I'm going to have to work hard, and I'm going to have to do all these. But if you just knew you could have a Rolex watch, then you might just want to know what time it is, or you might want to live an existence where you didn't have to worry about what time it was.
Exactly.
And didn't have any watch.
Right.
And I remember those great stories about the dervishes when they were in training, and one of their exercises is just to take off walking, no money, no nothing, and trust. And sure enough, you'll walk into a town and somebody will say drop by for lunch, and you know, we'll talk, and and somehow, because you have faith that it's all going to be cool, it's all cool.
Right.
All right, we're going to take a brief break now and hopefully sell something, and then we're going to come back. Okay, break's over. Now, back to the skeptics. All right, I have a friend, my closest friend in the town that I live in, whose experience of life is almost exactly like mine. And I have decided that my life is a marvel and a wonder and a joy forever. And he has decided that his is horrible. It's just horrible. And he works on me a lot so that I can be a proper intellectual and as miserable as he is, you know. So I, you know, abandon these stupid ideas and come back to the true faith. And but one of the things he throws at me, and it's something that okay, almost all of the traditions almost all of the shamanic traditions at some point in their history have had a ritual of human sacrifice. Well, we're kind of down on human sacrifice these days, although we still practice it in odd, surreptitious ways like war. And how do you explain that? Has anybody ever busted you on that? And if so, how do you explain it?
Yeah, I've had people come to me before with like, "Oh, those Toltecs, they sacrificed people." So the thing to understand is this is not globally the case, okay? But in most of the cases, what is being talked about when I talk about human sacrifice is about offering oneself to the divine, okay? And it's mostly, in most of the traditions, that's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay? What we're talking about is completely releasing yourself, giving yourself up, dying.
Ego death.
That's right, ego death, dying to your existence, okay? But not in terms of somebody comes along and cuts your heart out. Okay?
Right.
But even that imagery is exactly the imagery that we're trying to create, this idea of opening opening the heart so deeply and giving that back to the divine, to the earth, to the sun. Okay, that's usually what's being talked about in human sacrifice.
Yeah,
now, some cultures, in the cultural context of what they were doing, okay, that went to the place of complete sacrifice.
Right.
Okay, so people would offer themselves up. Usually, in the cultures that did practice human sacrifice, those people chose to do that because they really wanted to gift their community and, and the whole world around them with the expression of this total surrender into the divine.
Right.
Now, there were corruptions of that. There were wartime cultural things where people started killing other people, and really that didn't have anything to do with the spiritual teachings. That's a corruption of it.
One of the Toltec teachers, and I think it's Ray Dodd, and if it's not, my apologies to Ray Dodd and the other guy, but has a great story about that, which the logic behind it. Okay, the priests say I must give my heart to God, and I have these captives, so their hearts are my heart, and if I give my heart in their chest to God, then I get all the bennies.
Right.
But I'm still, you know, and the thing I love about that story, which is probably the logic behind it, but the thing I love about that story is that it's a perfect description of fundamentalism of all sorts.
Right.
You know, somebody that can't tell the difference between a poem and a blueprint.
And we see that throughout time. You know, it's not unique. It's important to understand that the people in these different traditions, you know, ages ago, were people just like you and me. Okay, same kind of domestication, same kind of confusion about why they were here. They were prone to making mistakes too. Sometimes a teacher says something like, you know, surrender, you know, kill your ego, okay, kill your I, release that to the divine, and then that teacher goes away, okay, or that teacher dies, and it was very clear what it meant before, okay, but now you've got people who start reading that and start misunderstanding and take on the dogmatic side of that and take things really literally that were supposed to be metaphors and start to distort the teachings into something that they were never meant to be.
And they're literally following a translation of a translation of a translation.
Right, exactly. Which is why in the old way it was an oral tradition that was passed from student to teacher. I mean, from, that too. But from teacher to
that too.
From teacher to student. And then those teachings were given as the student was ready to understand them.
Right.
Yeah? Now, we've done something totally different in this time period because all those teachings are available now.
Right, yeah.
Okay? So it's really hard for us to sort on our own what exactly did those teachings mean. It's still better to come back to someone who's actually practiced and developed a deep understanding, a direct knowing of those teachings, and get it from them because they can help you to actually experience it instead of just think about it.
Well, you know, I'm living proof of that because I read everything I could read about this stuff for, God, 1976 to about 2002, and then I went and interviewed Miguel. But before that, and all that time, somehow I had never met another human being who had the slightest interest in this crap, and yet now I know that there are millions of people who have a great interest in it. So I read everything, and I compared different takes, and I read about Sufism, and I read about Black Elk, and I read about Lame Deer, and I read about you know, and I had read Miguel, but I hadn't even thought about meeting him. And you would be amazed at the strange byways that my life took while I was trying to follow that stuff off the readings, you know. And I got a lot of benefit out of it, and a lot of things worked, and I was able to understand a lot of things. But the really big stuff, you know, the really big stuff didn't come through. And of course, like all of us, I'm still struggling with some of that stuff. And sometimes I see it all clear, and sometimes I fall right back into the same old pattern, and I'm saying, son of a bitch, you know.
Yeah, but the thing to understand about that in particular is that teachings are always, our experience of the teachings is always on a spiral.
Yeah.
So we're always revisiting these same core beliefs, okay? Whatever the deepest thing is, you know, let's take a belief like I'm not enough, okay? We're going to revisit that on many levels on the spiral. Now, it doesn't mean because it came back around that you didn't deal with it already. You did deal with it, but you dealt with it on this level, okay? Now we're at a subtler level, and it comes back again and re-arises, and we deal with it there. eventually we deal with it completely. And
Right,
peel the
hopefully.
onion until there's the last layer of the onion, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Okay? But until that time, it's really important not to judge ourselves and whenever we slip, quote, slip back into
Right.
an old pattern. Because we're moving through things at different levels.
Yeah, wow. I mean, this has been such a, you know, I kind of used up the adventures available in a dream of the planet, and was like most old soldiers wandering around wishing I could, you know, go in the jungle and follow a trail, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then you guys came along, and I was back in the different jungle following a different trail, but it's just as much fun. But it's also, and this is all right, one of the things I've thought of is that many of, you know, we live in a different world now, and many of the things that were, you know, that shamans would do, we have other people doing that we don't think of as shamans. You know, we have, I mean, our television writers do not think of themselves as shamans, but they kind of are, because they have this wonderful tool for, they can create a vision and impart it almost one for one. And psychologists don't think of themselves as shamans, but they have a shamanic function. But one of the things that people, it seems to me, don't realize is that there are dangers on this path. There are real dangers on this path. You can take wrong turns. You can get filled with self-importance and swear you're not. You can exploit your students. A real eye-opener for me. I mean, I've been a writer. I've been a writer for many years, and for many years before that, I aspired to be a writer, and my heroes were writers. And a real heads up for me was that when I realized that every writer that I really, really admired was dead at a younger age than I was when I had that revelation, and mostly, usually by flagrant substance abuse or by their own hand. You know, so that's one of those byways. So, and you know, and Don Miguel, the first thing that he says is awareness. That's the first thing you want to be, is aware. You want to start watching your reactions. But I'm pretty sure that somebody that blew his head off when he was 45 years old, after making a lot of money and becoming world famous, wasn't really aware. You know?
Right. Well, what we could say is the awareness is always there. You know, we're always aware, but the thing is that our attention, our awareness gets fixated. Okay? It gets fixated on certain patterns of thought or certain behaviors that become so familiar that to step outside of that is so terrifying, you'd rather kill yourself.
Yeah.
You know, than to actually step outside the sense of not having a self. What if I'm not the person that I think I am?
Right.
And that's what happens to people who commit suicide a lot of times, is they see that they're not that person. And that knowledge is so terrifying that they can't actually face that.
Right.
And so it's easier in the end, or it's the only way that they can find a way out of not facing the fact that they're not who they think they are, is to end that existence rather than face it.
Now this is the kind of discussion that I like better than any others. I have no small talk. I just want to talk about this stuff. And but one of the things that I want to be really sure to say is that you guys have a website, and it's you can Google Toltec Center for Creative Intent.
It's ToltecCenter.org.
ToltecCenter.org. Okay, so highly recommended. It's a great website. It's highly informative. There's a lot of stuff to read. There's a lot of stuff to see. It's getting to be along about that time. So before I shut it down, is there anything that you would just really like to say while you're here and you're talking to my people?
Well, there's one piece that has been coming up a lot lately in different things, and we touched on it in the beginning when we were talking about lineages. And I just wanted to reemphasize that it's very important to honor and respect where these teachings came from. Even though we are being, most of us are being very eclectic at this point and mixing and matching different traditions that fit our current lifestyle and our current life circumstances, it's also really important as part of your practice to have gratitude and respect for where those teachings came from.
Right.
So and to acknowledge that inside ourselves, that the seeds to these thoughts, the seeds to these practices all came from somewhere. And to touch in with your heart open and give gratitude for when you're doing practices, when you're doing spiritual work, for where that stuff,
right,
how it got here. Because people spent hundreds of years, keeping these teachings alive in secret, and risking their lives and dedicating their entire lives to making sure that these teachings were passed forward. And so just to have a little bit of respect and honor for that can actually really, two things, is just real, is just being real about it. And the other thing is, it helps you to tap in deeper, to have that gratitude and respect.
Right. Okay, super.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Let's blow this pop stand.